Okay, I've got a little session to do, it's probably about 15 minutes, something like that, around this ongoing idea of how we make ourselves have better organisations. Lovely title, Continuous Improvement, Harnessing Feedback to Align and Transform. Okay, there may be some things in this that you perhaps have thought about before, or perhaps you've heard about before, and you're probably going to hear about again, because I think Mr. Sturpey might be using it. So, we've got a same quote in our decks. See how we've coordinated. Okay, so this is really about how we actually go through a journey of continual improvement for us and our staff and the people inside our business. Okay, does anybody know who those people are? Yes, they're the GB cycling teams, yes, yeah. Yes, they are the women's, obviously, and men's GB team cycle teams from the 2016 Olympics. Does anybody know what they achieved? There's a clue on the left. They did indeed both achieve gold medals. Anybody else know something very special about how they achieved those gold medals? Ah, yes, we shall come to marginal gain shortly. You're absolutely right. There was something very special about both of those teams in that their gold medal performances were both new world records, which is quite remarkable when you think about, for 70 years, Britain hadn't won a single cycling medal ever at the Olympics. To go from that to the state where Britain is regarded as the highest performing cycling country in the world is quite remarkable. And you may well have guessed that cycling is quite close to my heart. Yeah. How did they achieve that? They achieved it because of really one man and an awful lot of effort. They achieved it because a gentleman whose name is David Brailsford, who's now the manager of the Sky cycling team, came up with an idea about the incremental accretion of marginal gains. And he looked at how people performed in sporting events. And he decided that the way forward was not to focus on something big, not to focus on a target for the future that was so big that it seemed out of reach. The idea is to focus on tiny, tiny improvements, constant tiny improvements. Now we'll come back to that in slightly more detail in a second, but for example, the British cycling track team were the first team to have heated shorts. Now you might think, heated shorts? What's that all about? Well, they have shorts that could be plugged in to heaters, well, to electric currents actually, to heat their thighs to the optimal temperature for muscular activity as they were cycling round a track. Obviously when they took the power out, they then start to cool down, but then they got on their bikes and off they went. All the other teams didn't have that, they just had cycling shorts. So it took a little while, even though they were warmed up, to get to exactly the right temperature. Tiny, tiny, tiny little gains. And that focus is on everything that the cycling teams do. It's not just the people, it's the bikes, it's the nutrition, it's everything that they do. Tiny little gains. Each of those gains bringing a fraction of a % of increase in performance. And if we think about how we do that with people, we very often look at people and have a 12-year plan. Now we have a 12-month plan, don't we? Yeah. We have a plan for them over the next 12 months. 12 months is probably, in this day and age, far too long. We should be looking at making tiny little improvements to people constantly. Hard to do, requires an awful lot of creativity and innovation and all those things that servant leaders possess and do. Yeah, but it's absolutely the way to get the very best out of our people and therefore the best out of our business. We will come back and revisit this in more detail as we go through, but Dave Brailsford came up with this idea of what he called the podium principles. In other words, how do you get people to get on a podium and win medals? And he basically said you have to have a strategy for that. You have to look at how you perform, and then you have to use the information that you glean from those two things to provide a mechanism for continuous improvement. Okay, so it's not rocket science here. So he said, well, when I look at any event in track cycling, what are the demands of the event that are required for someone to win it. In other words, how long is this race going to take? For how much time do individual people actually have to sprint or perform at a particular level? How much power do you need to get off the starting line to be able to get to a speed and a time that will win you the race? Yeah, let's look at the things, the metrics that are going to allow us to succeed. What are the metrics that we must exceed to allow us to succeed? So we need some data, and we need to decide on the key metrics. And once we've got those two things, we can work out how to improve them. You could translate that into your businesses. So you're not going out winning cycling races, are you? I don't think any of you guys are in a business of, we don't make money in our business by winning cycling races. Don't see anybody out there who's got their hands up for that one. So translating that into a real world thing, what are the demands of a customer and what does it take for us to satisfy them? I'm not going to ask you because we'll get into a long rabbit hole of discussion. How many of your businesses really know the demands of your customer? I'll just put that one out there. In fact, how many of your businesses know the demands of all the different kinds of customers you might have? It's getting a bit more complicated now, isn't it? Not just me as your customer. What about all of those customers? What about all those potential customers? Do you really know what it is that they want? In other words, do you have the data? And going back to our data metrics and continuous improvement. So from a strategy point of view, it's about understanding what your customer wants and what it takes to satisfy them. Two very important things. In the performance bit, if we go back to the cycling, what's the gap between what the individuals can do now and the required performance? Dave Brailsford could come along to me and he could say, well, Adrian, what you need to do is at the start of this 1,000-meter pursuit, what you need to do is you need to put out 450 watts for the first 5 seconds. And then he'd look at me and go, Adrian, you can't put out 450 watts for like a nanosecond, let alone 5 seconds. Yeah? The gap between what you can do and what you need to be able to do is this. So now we know the data that's supporting our decisions, the important data, the metrics that are going to help us work out how to get to where we want to be. Then we can move on to the CI, onto the continuous improvement. Putting that into a world of real commercial work, what's the gap between our value proposition and what the customer is saying to us? Okay, so now we know what the customer wants, all of the customers and the potential customers. Yeah, we know what their requirements are. Now we know what's the gap between what they say they want and what we can give them. And our job now is to bridge the gap. So in the cycling world, what changes can we make to the individual to bridge the gap between what our customer wants and what we provide? Sorry, that's the commercial world. Cycling world, I've got to get to my 450 watts. Yeah? How do I do that? What do I do? Do I look at my nutrition? Do I look at my exercise plan? Do I look at the frequency of my training? What do I look at? Yeah, I have to decide and make those small gains. So in our commercial world, what changes do we make to our proposition to bridge the gap to what the customer wants? There's no rocket science here. What there is creativity and innovation and thought about how do we change what we have, the people that we have, the offering that we have, how do we make them into the people that we have, the things that we have, the offering that we have that our customer really wants? Okay. The way to do that, because if I just skip back here, we've talked about this one, data, this one, metrics, the things that are important. How do we do this? How do we do this thing? We do this thing by getting our data and identifying our metrics and then getting to this point. Yeah, we look at the data, we find out about the data, we report on the data, and we take some actions based on the data. And we constantly go round this cycle, collecting more and more data, analysing more and more data, looking at the metrics that are important to us and important to our customers, coming up with some reporting on that, some modelling on that, and some actions on that. Round and round this vicious, virtuous circle. Somebody this morning mentioned data, and I can't remember who that was. It might have been you, Dave, yeah. And I think I mentioned data at some point. We've never had more of this available to us and more processing power available to crunch it than we have today. And of course, that's only true for now. Tomorrow there'll be even more, and the day after, and the day after, and the day after. And we're probably, with these words here, more words to baffle the uninitiated. Cloud-based analytics of big data. Wow, there we go. That's just lost the whole of humanity. You know, nobody understands what those words mean. But that's our way of understanding what the requirements of our customers are. We use the ideas behind big data, we use cloud-based big data analytic platforms, looking at the voice of the customer and their requirements, looking at all the different types of customers we have, all the different journeys they have with us. Huge amounts of data that we can crunch and manipulate and understand and model in different ways, more efficiently than we ever could have done before. And that's our opportunity now. Our opportunity is to get that data and use platforms that pre-exist for us to actually understand our businesses better. We make sure that we have metrics that are well defined, well understood, and consistent across the business. What is it we're trying to achieve? How is it we're trying to achieve it? And then we use tools-based reporting, we use models to understand how our analysis works, yeah, and what would happen if we did X or if we did Y. I think probably for the first time today, well, I haven't been here for every session, this is maybe the first session that's actually been about technology rather than a cultural change, perhaps. Perhaps I missed something that I haven't seen before. This is absolutely identified at both a cultural change in your business and a technology change. The businesses that are going to succeed in the next 5 to 10 years are those that are going to be using cloud-based platforms, big data, hardcore AI, machine learning and analytics. Yeah? And that needs to be your businesses over the next 5 to 10 years. To give you an example, if we look at how we analyse data now, here we've got the traditional ways of looking at data. We've got OLTP databases, we've got data cubes in OLAP, we've got some transactional data going on. We maybe have reports that come out of that. Yeah, we use that in our business. What we need to do is slot this into the middle, the big data analytics piece, to really give us the best understanding of the data that we could have. And what that really means is that we're using a whole variety of technologies over here about manipulating that deep data and really having hardcore analysis of that data to understand what it means. To do that, I might use things like MapReduce as a mechanism, or Hive, or Pig, or all these lovely words that seem to have been generated over the last few years. And I don't know how many of your organisations use any of those technologies. There are lots of others, all with equally strange names. Don't worry about the names, but be aware that those technologies exist. And if you're going to get continuous improvement from your businesses and your teams and your people, your businesses and your teams and your people are going to have to learn that. That's a new set of skills. You know, I've known many, many SQL DBAs over the years. Many, many, many of them. Yeah? Virtually none of their skills, zip, have got anything to do with what their skills need to be today. None. I've known lots and lots of Windows Server administrators over the years, and guess what? None of their skills are going to be necessary either in the coming years, because we're not going to be doing things that way anymore. People who are doing analytical work need to learn lovely languages like R. What a great name for a programming language, the shortest one in history, I think. Or maybe they want to use SPSS from IBM, or maybe they want to use SAS. Yeah? But they're going to learn new tools and techniques and technologies to do this work for us. So I think my overarching message is, if you want continuous improvement, you've got to understand that the people that you have need to change. And in that change, we can bring that improvement. But we can only bring it if we really understand what it is our customers want, what it is they say we need to provide to them, what's the difference between what we offer and what they want, and then we use our data and analysis to actually understand and report on the changes that we're making and what impacts they're having. And that's a really, really challenging journey. Not only have you got a whole bunch of new tech, you've got a whole new bunch of ways of measuring and improving and recruiting people perhaps, that are going to be key and core to understanding how to get your business into the next generation, which is terrifying. And Mr. Walker is signalling a T to me, which is either a T-shaped person, or it's time out, or I've been talking too much. Happy to take questions. Yeah.